So, there we have it. In a way, from the horse's mouth, or as near as damn it, there are no penalties for innocent errors. That's what Jim Hara says, the head of HM Revenue and Customs, which leads me to question the veracity of Zahawi's claim that he was the victim of carelessness, not deliberation. The implication being that just carelessness is no bad thing. But then, I'm not a tax lawyer. The general idea is that it's a sex scandal that brings down a Conservative MP and a financial scandal that brings down a Labour MP. But in our present government, a Conservative government, the Prime Minister is the person with the non-dom wife, and Boris is the person with the wallpaper, the expensive wallpaper and the peculiar loan arrangements. It's as if in embracing woke, these Conservatives have gone wholly native. Now, Nadhim Zahawi may have been Chancellor by mistake when all the great offices of state were up for grabs as Boris tried to cling on to power, but, in terms of accident, he can't hold a candle up to Kwasi Kwarteng's prodigious package. And maybe by the time of Hunt, maybe he thought that he was largely forgotten. Maybe he thought that by the time Hunt came along, nobody remembered that he had ever laid hands on the till. And now we're told that he was simply careless and that carelessness merited a £5 million tax bill. It just doesn't add up, does it? And so for that matter, if Nadhim Zahawi was careless, Boris was also careless, because Boris appointed him while all this carelessness about Zahawi's personal finances was ongoing. Apparently, at the time when Zahawi was appointed for that short period, HMRC raised a red flag, though Jim Hara said today that was unlikely. So did Boris see the red flag? Did Boris know about the problem? Did Boris ignore it? Or did he simply say nothing? Did he care? Was he careless as well, in other words? Or indeed, did it never happen, as Jim Hara implied today? Maybe Boris knew about it and he and Zahawi bonded over mutual carelessness. Maybe that's why the sofa needed a special clean. The real problem lies in exactly that issue of a clean-up. Not the sofa, but the absent-minded excuse and the threatening letters sent to Dan Needle. Dan Needle was he was the journalist who first raised the issue of Zahawi's tax. And the letters promised serious consequences about this investigation. And I suspect they're right. But those consequences must be for the former Chancellor, not for the investigative reporter. And when you start looking at what's been going on, it's the Bolshoi company. That's the fund in Gibraltar. That's the company in Gibraltar which seeded money. Who seeded the money? Who put the money in? Was it that Zahawi's father had provided the money, or had he provided simply the expertise? So the story's changed. But when the shares were sold, the problem of a £27 million windfall on the sale of the YouGov shares, and whether some of those shares crept into Mr. Zahawi Jr.'s account or not, that seems to be the crunch point. So, as I'm not a financial journalist. I don't really, I don't really focus on all this stuff. I focus on something slightly different. In fact, I focus on the tittle-tattle. I do. And I read the press, and it looks to me to be dodgy. Who do I blame? It doesn't seem to me to be a typical Conservative scandal at all, more like the sort of thing you might find reported disparagingly about a politician in some banana republic. Is that the phrase that was used? Yes, I'm not the first person to talk about a banana republic. I think that is the phrase that was used, yes. And now, the knife, the twisted knife. What Jim Hara said today. There are no penalties for innocent errors in tax. If you take reasonable care, but nevertheless make a mistake. This is what he said. Whilst you would be liable to pay the tax with interest, you would not be liable for a penalty. And then he went on to describe carelessness as something that might merit a penalty. So carelessness is not an innocent act. It is, he said, a concept in tax law. That's not how it was presented the other day by Mr. Zahawi. He then went on, Jim Hara then went on to caution that he was not in a position to comment on individual cases because he had not been given permission by an individual to do so. And therefore, he was in no position to correct any potentially false statements made to the media or to the public by any specific individual. That's very carefully chosen language. And it is, I think, pretty damning. He's pulling himself away from any attempt to rescue Mr. Zahawi. He's going to say as little as he possibly can to contribute to the problem, but he's not going to contribute to the solution. Now, Laurie Magnus, this ethics advisor, is now at liberty to draw whatever conclusions he may wish to draw, and it's worth noting that the 30% fine, the amount of the penalties Zahawi paid to HMRC, is the most HMRC can demand for, quote, a careless action, and most of the time it would be negotiated down. For a deliberate act of deceit, which no one is saying this is, HMRC might demand 100% of the value of the revenue owed. Now, I cannot for the life of me remember or think of what sum Ken Dodd paid, or whether Lester Piggott paid a penalty after or before he did time in prison. Maybe somebody knows. As I say, I'm not a tax lawyer. This to me seems to go beyond tax. It seems to be something about morality. And I think this is a test. This is a test of whether or not the ethics advisor is sound. So it's as much a test for Laurie Magnus as it is for Nadim Zahawi. If Rishi Sunak, however, thinks that it's a test for him or thinks that he needs to wait for Laurie Magnus, then frankly, Sunak has already failed that test. At this moment now, if Sunak has to wait before he acts, he has failed. Because I think, how can anybody possibly trust Mr. Zahawi to lead the Conservative Party into the next election? It is unthinkable. Unthinkable. And that's the question, and that's the issue that Mr. Sunak should have been considering. Not whether Mr. Zahawi has done something illicit or dodgy. Who cares? It's what the appearance is. It's the optics, not in fact even the facts. The facts can come later. Who cares? The optics are already damning enough. And Zahawi should have gone of his own volition, and if he couldn't go of his own volition, Mr. Sunak should already, by now, have pushed him.